And today we're going to be putting on the second tier of the skirt. So today's lecture will look a lot like the lecture that we did on Thursday, but we're going to be putting that second tier onto the first. So let's go ahead and switch over and we'll get started. Okay. Okay, so over here, the two pattern pieces that we are working with are the skirt front bottom tier, and then we've got the skirt back bottom. So skirt back bottom has those circles, and then the skirt front bottom has the stars. Okay, so we're going to be working with both of those. And both of these we know are the bottom, not only because of the labeling, but because of the seam allowances. On our other tier that we did, the top tier, it had a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the top and the bottom. But this one has that 1/4 inch seam allowance on the bottom because that's where we're going to do the hem later on. And then also front and back, we can tell the difference between the one single notch and the double notch. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew those side seams using our welt seam technique. So I'm going to take this as my back bottom, put it right sides together with my front, and we're going to pin it together at that side seam and stitch it at a 1/2 inch to get started. And again, you should have that 1/2 inch notch at the top to match up. And we'll do the same on the other side. Okay, let's go stitch these at 1/2 inch. I've got my machine set up for just a basic 2.5 stitch length. Same on the other side, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, let's go back and prep these. Over here, we're going to trim our little tails off of everything. It's got tangled up in my stitch. Okay. Now we're going to trim those with our pinking shears. And again, we're just trimming off the absolute least amount that we can. Now bust those open and then we're going to press both towards the back. So let's bust it open first. We'll get that really nice flat front on the other side. And then we've got to look for our notch to indicate the back. So I've got my double notch right here. So both of these are going to get pressed towards that back side. And let's do the same for the other one. Okay, and this time my back is over here. I can see my double notch on this side. So I'm going to press both of those over to that side. Okay, let's go top stitch those down. Okay, over here from the outside, we're going to use that seam as our guide and line that up with the 1/4 inch marking on our foot, and then top stitch through those seam allowances. And then same thing on my other side seam as well. I'm going to trim the tails of those stitches in just a little bit. But while we're at our machine, I'm going to go ahead and start putting in the basting lines for my gathering. Excuse me. So I need to first look for my notches. So again, that double notch on this particular tier of the skirt, that double notch is only on the top. On the bottom, we don't have it at all because that's where our hem is going to be. So you'll see no notches there on the bottom, double notch on the top. So that's how I can tell that this is the side I need to put my gathering stitches on. So I'm going to go ahead and start at one of my seam lines. I'm going to pull out some longer tails. And then just like we did before, we're going to start at our seam line. We're going to do that 5/8, 1/2 inch, and 3/8 inch seams. And we need to make sure we push up our stitch length to a 4.0. Okay, let's head over to our ironing board. So now over here, I'm going to go ahead and trim those tails that I never came over and trimmed. I'll start with that so that they don't get in the way of all my other tails that I need to pull on. Okay, now we're going to start pulling on these to match it up to the length of the bottom of the first tier. So I've got my dress here. We did that first tier last time. Last time we matched it up to the waist of that dress, but now we're matching it up to the length of that first tier. So this full spread out length is what we're matching it up to. So let's do front first. So I'm going to find my single notch to make sure. So there's my single notch to make sure that I'm on the front. And now I'm going to start pulling to match it up to that length of the bottom first tier. And again, don't forget these pieces are really long. So don't forget you can pull on both sides. I usually take the right side just because I'm right-handed. But since this is so long, in order to get those gathers all the way over to the left, you can pull on those tails on the left-hand side of your piece as well. Okay, so let's see lengthwise where we're at. I think I gathered it up a little bit too much. Okay, that's a lot closer. So now let's go over to the back. And we'll gather this one up. Okay, let's check our length. I think I got it too small again. Getting carried away with the gathers. Okay, let's go ahead and start pinning this. So look at your double notch here, and we're going to match it up to the double notch on our dress. And again, we want these to be right sides together. So I'm going to flip that skirt to where it's right sides together and match up that double notch. Do this the other way. There we go. And we're going to do our reference points first. So notches and seams first, and then we can spread out our gathers in between. When you match up those seams, make sure that you're matching up seam to seam and top stitch to top stitch. So those are right on top of each other. Okay, now single notch on this side. It's going to be hidden somewhere in here. There it is. Where's my single notch on here? Ah, there it is, very tiny. and then seam to seam again. Okay, and now we go through that section, excuse me, through that section in between. My camera wants to fall over right now. There we go. Okay, so now go through that section in between those two pins, pull it taut to make sure that the gathered portion and the skirt portion are the same length. And then we're just going to spread out those gathers. And if you need to pull it, if your gathers are too long and you didn't gather it up enough, you can always pull on those tails to gather it up a little bit more. I'm gonna lay this flat so I can spread them out a little bit more easily. Okay, once those are spread out, go ahead and pin that together. Okay, these got shifted a little bit. Okay, next section. Again, pull it so you can make sure both of those are the same length. My gathers aren't quite gathered up enough. So I'm going to pull on my tails to get those to the same length. Make sure that you pull those gathers all the way over to where that pin is and all the way over to your side seam so you don't end up with bald spots close to your reference points. Okay, let's pin that together. So see how this one gathered up too much? So I'm gonna have to let some of those gathers out at the side here. There we go. Okay, last little section. And this one is not gathered enough, so I will pull on my tails. These got a little bit tangled in the stitching. There we go. Let's go stitch these at 1/2 inch. Okay, over here, I'm just gonna push my stitch length back down to a 2.5, and then I'm gonna start at one of my side seams, and we're just going to stitch this at 1/2 inch the whole way around. Make sure as you go that you check for bald spots. So I have a flat spot right here. So as I go, I can always adjust this, kind of scoop those gathers around so that I don't end up with that bald spot in the end. I don't know if I'm getting my skirt got a little bit tucked up on the back side. So you can see right here where it started to get tucked up. So I'm gonna fix that before I move on. So let me grab my seam ripper. So you've got to check as you go on to make sure that that sort of stuff doesn't happen. So I'm just going to seam rip that small section. It's about 2 inches. So I can fix it before I move on. Okay, so I just seam ripped that small section. I'm going to backtrack to where my seam ended. So you can see here where my seam ended, and I had to seam rip this portion down here. So I'm going to backtrack and back stitch over where my seam ended so that that stitching does not come out. We'll continue on and just keep checking underneath to make sure that your skirt does not get tucked up like that. can connect to your back stitch where you started so you have a full circle. And then we'll go ahead and take this over to the ironing board and clean everything up and take those gathering stitches out. Over here, we are going to check our seam on that flat side and make sure that we didn't end up with any tucks that we shouldn't have had. And then once we're satisfied that that 1/2 inch seam was good, then we can start taking out all of our gathering. So pull on it. The more you can get out by hand without having to use your seam ripper, the easier and quicker this will go. Okay, thank goodness. I think we are good enough for the next step on video. But like I said, I would want you to take out that full basting line. I still have some little areas where it's left. You can see where there's 2 lines of stitching right there. That second one is not showing on the front. So I'm going to move on video, but make sure that yours is fully cleaned up before you move on. Okay. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is trim these with our pinking shears. And again, we're just trimming off the very edge to prevent fraying. Okay. Now we need to press this. So I'm going to get all this lint out of the way so hopefully it doesn't get stuck to my dress. And now from the outside, I'm going to press both of those seam allowances towards that top tier. So make sure you have that really nice flat seam, that those are as pulled apart as much as possible. And then we're just going to press that seam the whole way around. And those seam allowances get stuck up towards the top tier. Okay, pin it from that outside so we can top stitch these seam allowances down. And on the back side, make sure you're getting through those seam allowances to hold them down. So this is a really good example of that side seam matching up right here. So I've got my seam matching perfectly and my top stitch matching perfectly. So that is what I want your side seams to look like. Okay, let's go top stitch these down at 1/4 inch. Okay, so I'm just going to put my dress one single layer on there. And again, we're going to use that seam as our guide. Line that up with our 1/4 inch marking on our foot. And then I'm going to start right at my side seam, sorry, rather than in the middle. There we go. And then we're going to just top stitch 1/4 inch all the way around. And then connect back to your back stitch. Okay, and then the last step is going to be to pull off these tails, to cut off these tails, and to press before we go to do our hem, which we'll do next class. So let's look at how this is coming together. So trim your little tails anywhere that you have tails hanging off, and make sure that your seam allowances got caught on that inside. So you can see here where my original stitch line was and then where my top stitch line was. So those are both holding down those seam allowances. Okay, so this is where we're at overall. This is the back of our garment with our little bodice. Next class, we will do the very last 2 steps, which will be to put on our buttons and to hem that bottom tier.